God speaks, the middle of page 99. First stage, visualize a man with eyes completely shut and in sound sleep. This man is completely unconscious and is oblivious of all that surrounds him. Now picture at the same time the original divine sound sleep state of God, as he is in the original absolute vacuum of the God is state. In both cases, that is, both in God's formless state and God's state of human form as man or woman, there is complete absence of consciousness, and in both cases, absolute vacuum prevails. Simultaneously, also picture the total absence of consciousness in both cases as comparable to the completely shut eyes of a man in sound sleep. Second stage, visualize the next state of the man as being still asleep, but beginning to open his eyes very, very slightly, because he is just bestirred from his sound sleep state, and the spell of absolute vacuum is shattered by the emergence of the dormant impressions now commencing to project through the subconsciousness of the man, which also lay latent in him in his sound sleep state. Because of the projection of the varied impressions through the subconsciousness of this man, he now begins to experience dreams while still asleep, although no longer in the sound sleep state, because the absolute vacuum no longer prevails. For the man to commence experiencing dreams means that in his initial stage of the semi-conscious state, he begins to experience through his subconsciousness the dormant impressions of the nothingness in subsubtle forms. The man now is not only in the initial stage of the semi-conscious state, and is not only beginning to experience dreams, but he is also starting to get involved in the dreams by beginning to associate with the creatures in subsubtle forms of his own creation. Thus the projection of impressions, which lay dormant in the subconsciousness of man, makes man play the role of the hero or the creator in the drama of his dreams. Because this man, in this dream state, has only just stirred from his sound sleep and has just attained the semi-conscious state, picture this man experiencing the dreams as one who is starting now to open his eyes very, very slightly. The beginning of the opening of the eyes resembles the advent of the first trace of consciousness as subconsciousness manifested in man. While visualizing this state of man as a parallel, picture likewise that state of God in which he has just stirred from his original divine sound sleep state. God now only begins to experience the divine dream state, or the creator state, as soon as the first most finite impression of the nothingness is projected through the divine subconsciousness of God. Both of these, i.e., the nothingness and the divine subconsciousness of God, were latent as of nothing in the original state of God as the everything. God, now in the initial stage of the divine semi-conscious state, just begins to identify himself with the creatures of his own creation, i.e., his own divine dream. Through the infinite divine subconsciousness, which just begins to project the creation, that is, the impressions of the nothingness. Third stage. Visualize the third state of the man as still asleep but with half-open eyes, because a man in this state now completely experiences the semi-conscious state. In order to picture this complete semi-conscious state of the still sleeping man, continue to visualize him with eyes very, very slightly open, representing the beginning of the semi-conscious state. In this state, as said above, he starts to experience dreams due to the false illusory impressions of the nothingness, which were collected subconsciously and are now ejected out through the projection of the subconsciousness, giving rise to the beginning of the dream state of man. But as the dreams continue, and as they gather momentum due to the intensity of the projection of multifarious and varied dormant impressions through the subconsciousness of the man, he gets more and more involved subconsciously. As a result, he now firmly associates himself with the creatures of his own creation in the dreams, and he is completely in the semi-conscious state. This semi-conscious state of the man represents that state which is neither the complete sound sleep state without consciousness, nor the complete awake state with full consciousness. This state, so to speak, is the semi-awake state. Now visualize this third state of the man as the state of semi-consciousness, represented by half-opened eyes, experiencing the dreams more forcefully and much more intently. While visualizing this state of the man, picture as a parallel that state of God in the divine dream state, where God is experiencing a semi-conscious state. At this stage, God, as the creator of creation, experiences the creator state through the infinite divine semi-conscious state. Here the infinite divine subconsciousness, intensively projecting creation into being, continually affirms God's identification with the creatures of his own creation. This gives rise to infinite experiences of a more forceful nature in the divine dream of God, when God actually finds himself as the creatures of his creation. Visualize the fourth stage. Visualize the fourth state of the man as that in which he is still asleep, but trying gradually to open wider his already half-opened eyes, in accordance with the greater and greater intensity of the projection of more and more impressions through the subconsciousness of the man still in his dream state. Here the man is not only in a semi-conscious state, but is verging on being fully conscious and is about to realize his awake state. Now, paralleling this, picture also that the state of God in the fourth stage of his divine dream state. Compare the fourth state of the man in the semi-conscious state with a very critical stage in the divine dream state of God. Here the projection of infinite impressions through the infinite divine subconsciousness of God is so intensified in the course of the cosmic evolution of the consciousness of God that this projection is about to be so completely fixed or so perfectly focused onto the infinity of nothingness as to identify God with his own most perfect image in his divine dream of creation. Thus, at this stage in the divine dream state, God the Creator is about to identify himself with a human form after innumerable identifications with all and everything that is in his creation, including inanimate and animate objects. God, in the divine, infinite, semi-conscious state, is now nearing the verge of gaining full consciousness concurrently with his identification with human form. Fifth stage. Visualize the fifth state of the man as being still asleep, but with eyes now almost open. The man in this state is still in the semi-conscious or semi-awake state, experiencing the dreams at their height in their final stage, in which the impressions are projected through his subconsciousness with the greatest intensity. The zenith is reached both by the intensified projection of the impressions in much less hazy forms, or in greater degree of realism, and by relevant dreams which are dreamt in a greater degree of clarity, or in their ripe stage. This is the stage in dreams when the subsubtle forms of nothingness have reached their zenith and appear more clearly. The dreams at their height now must stop, because the zenith reached by the projections of impressions through the subconsciousness of the man is at this point sufficient to excite and urge the emergence or manifestation of full consciousness at any moment. This state of the man, almost fully conscious, may therefore be pictured as a man with his eyes almost wide open, though still asleep. This is the stage reached a split second before the man has roused from his dream state to become wide awake. This is the completely matured, semi-conscious state of subconsciousness. While visualizing the fifth state of the man, side by side with it, picture that state of God in his divine dream state, where God is experiencing the completely matured state of the divine, infinite, semi-conscious state, and is almost about to gain full consciousness. At its zenith, the intensity of the projection of infinite impressions through the divine, infinite subconsciousness of God has almost ceased to identify God semi-consciously with the last of the creatures in the cosmic evolution of creation and forms. With divine, infinite subconsciousness, God, in his divine, infinite, semi-conscious state, which when almost matured, identified God with infinite impressions of animal forms. But now in the fifth stage of the divine dream state, where God is in the completely matured divine, infinite, semi-conscious state, God can no longer be made to identify with impressions of animal forms, even though they are intensively and infinitely projected through his divine, infinite subconsciousness. At this point, a stage is reached in the divine dream state wherein, with the projection to infinity of impressions projected infinitely through the divine, infinite subconsciousness of God at its zenith, this infinite projection has almost identified God with a human form, and God is almost fully conscious. Sixth stage. Visualize the sixth state of the man as having completely awakened from his sleep and as having his eyes completely wide open. In this state, the man is no longer in the semi-conscious state, dreaming the dreams which were nothing but the hazy and faint projection of the dormant impressions of nothingness, which were stored in the subconsciousness of the man, and realized through his subconsciousness in subsubtle forms of nothingness. This is the stage in the state of the man where he has just awakened completely, but albeit he is fully conscious. He is not conscious of his, quote, self as yet. The man is no longer in his sound sleep and semi-conscious states, and, with full consciousness gained, is pictured now with wide open eyes. This means the end of the dream, or the end of the false state of man where he experienced the latent or dormant nothing manifested in its raw state as nothingness in the shape of hazy and faint subsubtle forms. The man now in the awakened state no longer experiences or sees the nothingness as something hazy or faint, as he used to see it in his dream state. With his eyes just opened wide and fully, he is dazed and stares vacantly at things that now confront his sight more realistically. The man now observes things that confront his sight as if he were seeing the ripe, the clear, and the fully developed forms of the same nothingness that he saw in his dream as raw, hazy, and faint. In this state, the man sees, as it were, yet another dream, but he sees it much more realistically than the dream from which he awakened a split second before. This is the sixth stage in the state of man, where the man, dazed, simply experiences the sight of things much more realistically, but still as if it were just a vacant dream. That is, the man sees more forcefully and realistically, but still vacantly, the dream of his dream state, giving him the sense of yet another dream within the dream of his dream state. This state corresponds to the few seconds immediately after a man has awakened, and cannot help but see at first the objects that come within range of his vision, rather than his own self. This is because as soon as his eyes open after the sleep state, the spontaneous opening of the long shut eyes creates in him a sort of dazed state, and although the man has awakened and is fully conscious, he is still unaware of his self or of its position in relation to the objects surrounding his very self. He simply stares at the objects upon which his gaze falls. While visualizing the sixth state of the man, make a parallel of it by picturing in the same way that state of God as of that instant when God has just identified himself with a human form and has just gained full consciousness. At that moment, God is no longer in the divine, infinite, semi-conscious state, dreaming the original divine dream, which was the projection of the latent nothing, released by the divine, infinite, subconsciousness as the creation, or as completely evolved nothingness. In this sixth state, God is now out of his original divine sound sleep and his divine infinite semi-conscious states because he is now fully conscious. Here God is conscious not of his unlimited self, nor of his infinite, unbounded, and unlimited trio nature of infinite power, knowledge, and bliss, but is just fully conscious. God is fully conscious now in the sense that God is consciously absorbed in the nothingness, which now manifests through his full consciousness as clear and well-defined, realistic, gross states apparently demonstrating their infinite aspects ad infinitum. Seventh stage. Visualize the seventh state of the man where he has his eyes wide open and is completely and fully awake, in the sense that he now asserts his limited self or ego, and is conscious of his human form or the gross body, of his surroundings, and of the gross world. Though this man is fully conscious and completely aware of the gross, and experiences the gross world in full, yet he is still unconscious of the limited energy and mind of which he indirectly makes unconscious use, being aware of their aspects through the limitations of his gross body alone. In this state, the man is fully conscious, but gross consciously, and is fully aware of himself as a man in the world of his surroundings. The man is not only completely aware of the gross world and of all the things in the world which confront his view, but he also actually experiences them by involving his fully conscious and fully aware state of limited self in them. He now recognizes the objects of the gross world through his five predominant gross senses and differentiates them one from another, using them discriminately or indiscriminately, automatically and indirectly utilizing energy and mind, which are now fully developed, in attaching to them their relative values as and when his limited self asserts in his awake state before he passes away once again in sound sleep. In the awake state, it is the mind that sees through the gross eyes, hears through the gross ears, smells with the gross nose, eats through the gross mouth, and acts through the gross limbs. In the dream state, subconscious state, it is the mind that sees through the subsubtle eyes, hears through the subsubtle ears, and so on. In the sound sleep state, it is the mind that is at peace and at rest. While visualizing the seventh state of the man, picture likewise that state of God, where God identifies himself completely with the human form and gains full and complete consciousness. God no longer dreams divinely the original divine dream, but with full consciousness now completely gained, he experiences falsely the complete awareness. This awareness makes God falsely aware of that original nothing which was latent in his own state of infinitude, and which, with the present gain of full consciousness, makes God experience that nothing realistically as the everything, infinite and real. In other words, God, when he was in the divine, infinite, semi-conscious state, was experiencing the latent nothing, manifested as the nothingness as his divine dream. Now, when God is in a fully conscious state, he apparently experiences that nothing, not as the divine dream of nothingness, but he now actually experiences the awareness of this nothing as the everything. In this stage, with the advent of awareness, although God in the state of creator has stopped dreaming divinely the original divine dream, yet, because of his having gained full consciousness and complete awareness, God now becomes completely aware of the original divine dream, not as a dream, but as something realistic, not as illusion, but as reality, not as the nothing, but as the everything, preserving the nothing that he created. Thus it is that, although God gained full consciousness and experienced complete awareness in the state of Creator, this very awareness of God the Creator proves a deception and makes God now experience his own divine dream, or the creation of the nothing as reality, while he identifies himself with the human being. In short, God the Creator, as the God in man, though now fully conscious and completely aware and out of his original divine dream state, yet finds himself not as God, but as man, with complete gross consciousness, experiencing the creation of his own original divine dream state as reality. Here it is to be said that the God in man continues to experience in the awake state, with the awareness of false reality, the vacant divine dream, as yet another dream of God within that original divine dream. This is the most alluring stage in the state of God, when, with full consciousness gained, God is led astray, by the false awareness attained to identify himself not with his unlimited and infinite self, but with his most perfect image in the shape of the human being, while God continues to experience the vacant divine dream. Although it appears as the most fantastic imagination, yet it is a fact that the very life of man is the veil that shrouds the reality of the eternal existence of God. It is the irony of divine fate that God gets lost in man to find himself, and the instant that man gets lost in God, God realizes his reality as existence, eternal and infinite. In other words, infinite God becomes infinitely absorbed in his own infinitely perfect image, intently seeking his infinity. And although God does gain full consciousness through it, he does not realize the reality of his own eternal, infinite existence in it. But the instant the full consciousness thus gained ceases to identify God with the infinite reflection of his infinitely perfect image, this image vanishes from the consciousness of God, and God spontaneously and automatically and consciously realizes his own identity as God, the infinite existence, and finds that he alone ever was, always is, and eternally will remain the only reality. Thus God in the man state, at first realizing himself as man, asserts his limited aspects through the limited self, or the limited ego, the limited mind, the limited energy, and the finite gross body. Then, eventually and ultimately realizing himself as God, he manifests his unlimited, unbounded, infinite trio nature of infinite knowledge, infinite power, and infinite bliss through his divine unlimited self, while depicting through the 7 different primary stages the process of unfoldment of the latent consciousness of God in his original unconscious divine sound sleep state, as compared with the 7 different primary states of man gaining consciousness, right from his unconscious sound sleep state to the state wherein he gains full consciousness and wakes up completely with wide open eyes. It is found that this is the process of the evolution of consciousness of God, which eventually identifies the fully conscious God with the fully conscious man, after identifying God with all and everything inanimate and animate in the drama of the divine dream of creation. Right from the unconscious state compared to the divine sound sleep state, until full and complete consciousness is gained in the man state, parentheses, compared to the wide open eyes of man experiencing the gross world, God remains one, indivisible, infinite, formless, and eternally all-pervading.